She smiled through every red carpet photo. She defended her marriage in every interview. For years, Portia de Rossi said nothing, and that silence spoke louder than any headline. But now, everything has changed. The woman who once called Ellen DeGeneres her greatest love is finally talking. And what she's saying doesn't sound like a fairy tale anymore. So, what really happened behind those closed doors? And why did it take this long for the truth to come out? Everyone believed in them. And I mean everyone. When Portia de Rossi and Ellen DeGeneres got married in August 2008, the world didn't just celebrate, it exhaled. Here were two women, publicly in love, legally married in California, standing in front of cameras with nothing to hide. It felt like proof that love could win. That happiness was real. That some stories actually had a perfect ending. The photos were everywhere. Magazine covers, talk show appearances, red carpet moments where they held hands and laughed like nobody was watching, even though everyone was. Millions of people looked at them and saw something they needed to see. A love story that couldn't be broken. But here's the thing nobody talks about. Portia had already been through this before. Before Ellen, before the fame, before the world knew her name, she had quietly married a man named Mel Metcalf, a documentary filmmaker, a marriage she rarely mentioned and almost never explained. It was short, it ended, and then she did something incredibly brave. She came out publicly in Hollywood, at a time when that still cost careers. She rebuilt herself from scratch, found her identity, fought for her place, and then she walked straight into the most watched relationship in the entire entertainment industry. For years, she played the role perfectly. She laughed at Ellen's jokes on stage. She glowed at award shows. She posted anniversary tributes that made millions of people screenshot and share. Relationship goals, everyone said. The dream, they called it. No one questioned it. No one dared. Because questioning Ellen and Portia wasn't just questioning a couple. It felt like questioning hope itself. But behind every perfect public performance, there is always a private reality. And the people closest to them started seeing it. Industry insiders, former friends, even crew members who worked on the Ellen DeGeneres show day after day. They noticed things the cameras never caught. Small things at first. A look, a pause, a tension that didn't match the smiling photos. Then the small things became bigger things. Whispers started spreading. Portia was feeling invisible. The dynamic inside the marriage didn't match the version being sold to the public. Something was shifting, slowly, quietly beneath the surface. Nobody said it out loud, because some stories feel too sacred to touch. But Portia was quietly carrying something heavy, something that was building weight with every passing year. And the longer she carried it alone, the heavier it got. What nobody expected was how she would finally put down. And that story starts in the most unexpected place. Nobody saw 2020 coming. And for Ellen DeGeneres, it arrived like a wrecking ball. It started with one story, then another, then dozens. Former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show came forward with accounts that shook the entertainment world. They described a work environment built on fear, on silence, on a gap between the public image of kindness and what allegedly happened when the cameras stopped rolling. Words like toxic, hostile, and mistreatment filled headline after headline. The woman who had built an entire brand, an entire identity around the phrase "be kind" was now being accused of the exact opposite. The internet turned fast, the way it always does. And Portia? She stood by her, publicly without hesitation. She posted support. She defended the woman she loved. She did what partners are supposed to do when things fall apart. She held on. But privately? That's a different story. Because here's what no one was saying out loud at the time. This wasn't just a PR crisis for Ellen. For Portia, it was something far more personal. When the person you've built your life around suddenly becomes someone the world sees differently, you start seeing them differently too. You start asking questions you buried years ago. Questions like, who are they really when no one is watching? What did I miss? What did I choose not to see? And then the harder question, what did I give up to be here? Portia had quietly stepped back from her acting career during the marriage. Not dramatically, not with a big announcement, It just happened. Projects became fewer. Her name appeared less and less in casting conversations. The sharp, rising career she had built, through Ally McBeal, through Arrested Development, through real, recognized talent, had softened into the background. People stopped calling her Portia de Rossi the actress. They started calling her Ellen's wife. For someone who had fought so hard, genuinely fought, to find herself, to name herself, to claim her own identity after years of hiding it, that kind of erasure is not small. It doesn't just sting. It hollows something out. And in 2020, when everything was already burning publicly, that hollow place became impossible to fill with silence anymore. She still didn't speak. Not yet. The moment wasn't right. The words weren't ready. But something inside her had shifted permanently. And what came next would push her all the way to the edge. There is a kind of silence that looks like peace from the outside. But anyone who has lived it knows it is anything but. It is the silence of someone who is choosing every word so carefully, so deliberately, that they would rather say nothing at all than say the wrong thing. It's protective and exhausting, and over time it becomes its own kind of cage. Portia de Rossi had lived in that silence for years. People who knew her before the marriage, really knew her, described someone electric, sharp wit, deep emotional intelligence, the kind of person who saw through everything and made you laugh about it all at once. She was not someone who faded easily. She was not built to be background, but she had already learned, long before Ellen, that silence was survival. Coming out publicly in Hollywood in the early 2000s taught her that. The industry watched, the industry judged, and the women who said too much, too honestly, too soon, paid for it. So she learned to protect herself with careful words, with deflection, with humor that kept people just far enough away. That skill kept her safe. It also kept her hidden. In interviews during the later years of the marriage, people started noticing something. Portia's answers were always polished, always measured. She talked about love in broad, beautiful terms. She deflected personal questions with a smile and a joke. But she never, not once, gave the kind of raw, unguarded answer that made you feel like you were seeing the real her. Journalists noticed. Longtime fans noticed. Even casual viewers noticed. And then something changed. Quietly and without announcement, Portia began pulling back from the public eye in a new way. Not disappearing, but withdrawing with purpose. She poured herself into general public, the art company she had founded. She began talking about creativity not as a pastime, but as oxygen, as the thing that made her feel like herself again. She was building something that had her name on it, only her name. And in that building, in the quiet, private act of creating something that belonged to nobody else, a decision was forming, not an explosive one, not a dramatic one, the slow, unshakable kind. The kind that comes when a person finally stops waiting for circumstances to change on their own and realizes they are the only one who can change them. The world didn't know yet. Most people around her didn't know yet. But Portia knew, and the only question left was, when would she finally say it out loud? Every breaking point has a beginning, and rarely does it look the way you'd expect. There was no public fight, no caught-on-camera blow-up, no dramatic TMZ moment at an airport. That's not who Portia is. That has never been who she is. Her breaking point came the way most real ones do, quietly, privately, in the middle of an ordinary moment when something finally became too clear to ignore. People close to her say she had reached a particular kind of exhaustion. Not the kind that sleep fixes, the kind that builds over years when you keep performing a version of yourself that doesn't match what you feel inside. When you keep saying, "I'm fine" so many times that you start to forget what fine actually feels like. What finally made her talk wasn't anger. It wasn't revenge. Those would have been easier to understand. What made her talk was something far more unsettling. It was clarity. Cold, clean, undeniable clarity about what the years had cost her. Not just career opportunities, not just time, but the deepest parts of her sense of self. The parts that make you you. She started talking to people she trusted, slowly, carefully. A few close friends first, the kind of people who had known her before any of this, before the fame, before the marriage, before the public version of Portia de Rossi became the only version most people recognized. And what she said to those people was not what the tabloids had been printing for years. It was messier, more human, more honest than anything she had ever allowed the public to hear. She talked about disappearing inside a relationship, about how you can love someone deeply and still lose yourself completely in their orbit, about how public love, the kind that lives under constant cameras and public expectations, creates invisible rules that slowly replace your own instincts. She didn't position herself as a victim. That is important. That is very Portia. She is not someone who asks for sympathy, but she did say things that reframed everything, things that made the people listening see the entire story differently. And when those words began moving beyond that small, trusted circle, the reaction was immediate. Because the world had only ever been given one version of this love story, and Portia had just quietly offered another one, this is the part of the story most people never get to write. The chapter that comes after the ending, the one where you find out who someone really is when they're no longer performing for anyone. Portia de Rossi did not fall apart. She didn't show up in tabloid photos looking broken. She didn't go silent in a sad way. She didn't turn the pain into public spectacle. Instead, she did something that genuinely surprised the people who thought they had her figured out. She went home. She returned to Australia, the country that shaped her before Hollywood ever got its hands on her. The place where she was Amanda Rogers before she renamed herself, where she was a girl before she was a brand, and something visible happened when she got there. People who saw her during this period described a woman who seemed lighter, not performing lightness, not projecting it for cameras, actually genuinely, privately lighter, like she had put something down and hadn't picked it back up. Her work, through general public, took on new life. She began speaking about art with a passion that didn't sound like a hobby or a side project. It sounded like a calling, like something she had been walking toward for years and had finally arrived at. Some people in the media tried to frame it as avoidance, as Portia hiding behind creativity to escape the spotlight. But the people who actually knew her said no. This was different. This was Portia coming back to herself. She began opening up, carefully and in measured doses, about what these years had taught her, about self-worth, about the quiet danger of building your identity inside someone else's story, about how love, even real love, even good love, can become a cage if you stop tending to who you are inside of it. She wasn't bitter. There was no venom in it. There was something rarer than bitterness. There was peace. And for the first time in a very long time, when people talked about Portia de Rossi, they weren't talking about her in relation to anyone else. They were just talking about her. The artist, the woman, the person who had walked through something hard and come out the other side still standing. But the deepest, most honest conversation, the one she had been building toward for years, was still coming. And nothing could have fully prepared people for what she said when she finally sat down and told the whole truth. When Portia finally spoke, really spoke, the setting itself told you everything. It wasn't a late-night talk show. It wasn't a glossy magazine piece with soft lighting and carefully approved quotes. It was something that felt deliberate, chosen, like she had thought about this moment for a long, long time and decided exactly how she wanted it to happen. And when she opened her mouth, it landed differently than anything she had ever said before. She talked about the years of silence, not as failure, not as weakness, as survival. She explained something that resonated with millions of people who had never been famous a day in their lives, that public relationships come with invisible rules. Don't complain. Don't contradict. Don't give the world a reason to tear down something they've decided to love. And that following those rules year after year can make you forget what your own voice even sounds like. She went further back, further than most people expected. She talked about the battles she had fought long before Ellen ever entered her life, the eating disorders that nearly destroyed her in her 20s, The years spent hiding her sexuality in an industry that punished honesty. The exhausting work of performing a version of herself that the world wanted to see, a version that was always slightly different from the real one. And she connected those old wounds, honestly and without self-pity, to the patterns she found herself repeating even in her most celebrated, most publicly admired relationship. But here is the part that surprised everyone most. She spoke with no malice. None. She didn't name-call. She didn't weaponize old pain for headlines. She talked about two people who had genuinely loved each other, and who were still, at the end of everything, wrong for each other in ways that no amount of effort or public image management could fix. She said the hardest thing she ever did wasn't walking away. It was admitting she needed to, and in saying that, plainly, without performance, without armor, she gave something to every single person watching. Permission. Permission to say the same thing about the relationships, the jobs, the versions of themselves they have been holding onto long past the point of good reason. That is why this story matters. Not because it involves celebrities, not because it has drama or divorce or headlines. It matters because it is honest, because someone who had every reason to keep performing finally chose to stop. Silence protects you. Until it doesn't. Until it starts costing more than the truth ever would. And when it finally breaks, what comes out is usually the most real thing you have ever heard. Portia de Rossi spent years being known as someone else's person, someone else's story, someone else's headline. Now, for the first time, she is just her own.